A big thanks to our sponsors who make the pudding possible.
The American Camp Association of Illinois is made up of nearly 289,000 members, volunteers, campers, families, and professionals who believe in the power of camp. They work to disrupt the effects of poverty by providing fundamental services for children and families and learning opportunities for camp professionals. Learn more about ACA Illinois by visiting acail.org. You know the impact you want to make in a child's life, but figuring out the day-to-day details can be overwhelming. Let Camptivities help you make that impact by streamlining the creation of your camp activity schedules. Schedule a demo at camptivities.com.
Welcome to the pudding.
The sweet proof of research to back up what you know about camp. Hi, I'm Dr. Mandy Baker. My pronouns are she, her.
And I am Travis Allison. My pronouns are he and him. And we want to welcome you once again to the pudding, where, as Mandy said, we're talking about the sweet proof of the research that exists about the camp industry. And we're grateful for the feedback we've already had about episode 1 that came out in the Camp Hacker feed, and are looking forward to doing many more. We have a bunch of these recorded. We did want to take a step back in this recording today, this discussion today, to just talk about even more about what research is, what it's like, what are the different kinds of research. So Mandy, what do we need to know when we think about if people like me are damaged by college education and having to not just take stats courses, but just having to do research projects of their own and basically read a lot of research. How do we bridge that gap between the work that we do, the studies around it, and what we need to know about how people are looking at the work that we do?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why we're doing kind of a jump back today is I woke up this morning remembering something that we didn't talk about last time and thought it was pretty important to talk about it. I realized that camp professionals and parents and staff out there who are coming to camp research would definitely benefit from having a bit of a mini session on how research works. And so I'm inviting you to climb inside a nice warm tub and soak in the warmth of camp research for just a few moments, hopefully take some of that tension away and form a bit of tenderness towards research. By unpacking some of the key ideas that make research what it is and make that different than, say, a Google search or how you decide to buy the fridge that you want to buy. It's a little bit different, and that's because there are particular parameters around how we go about doing the work and how we assess whether it's good, how we assess whether research is good and has done the job right. But to start us all off, to kick it all off, just like you said, is recognizing that there are different kinds of research for different purposes. So the different strokes for different folks is an absolute important one to remember here. In the research world, there are generally sort of 2 camps or sometimes 3 camps in terms of the purpose of the research changes the kind of research you do. So, for example, marketing research is very, very different than the kind of research that I do because I have a different purpose for it. Right. There's also marketing research is about really 2 significant bits. It's knowing who your product or service is for, so understanding your market, your people, your audience, and any good person worth their salt who produces any kind of information in the world needs to know their audience. I have a feeling you say that a lot to folks. Know your audience. Yep. And the other side of marketing is being able to speak to the value of what you do to that audience. In university world, academia, we also do something called applied research, and we also do something called basic or pure research. So applied research is when we're trying to solve a real life world problem. And then basic or pure research can have real world solutions to them, but they tend to be a lot more abstract and a lot more theoretical. So understanding how a thing works and trying to understand how it might work like that again in the future, or how we might navigate what we call the phenomenon. That's often what it is, that like experience, that thing we know. So this phenomenon called camp, that's when we do a lot more theoretical work.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that there are different kinds or styles of research. What do we need to know about that?
Sure. So generally speaking, research gets divided into two fairly significant camps. And that's based on the way that the information is given to us and how we make sense out of that information. So that's what we call data collection and data analysis. At that point, there's quantitative data and there's qualitative data. Quantitative tends to be all in different kinds of numbers, and how those numbers represent things are used differently and calculated differently based on how those numbers represent things. And then qualitative tends to be research that is about words and stories, but you'll also find qualitative research captures all the creative outputs too. So we might do an analysis, for example, of all of the pictures that are used to market camps. I did this with my class a couple weeks ago. It's called a netnography. And just for a bit of fun, I told them to go to their home camp and take a screenshot of the picture of their home camp. And we talked about the kinds of images and the kinds of people that are being used to represent the camps. So we had an analysis of, what is the stereotype of who goes to camp based on how we market camp, because that definitely shapes our expectations about who's invited and who's welcome and who belongs and who matters in camp space.
Yeah.
And that shapes behavior. So whether somebody was going to sign up their kid or not, if you don't represent somebody that looks like that person, there's a chance they'll go, well, this isn't for us. Yeah. So qualitative research captures a lot of creative, interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually story-based or storytelling.
Great. That it is fascinating that how we represent each other, ourselves to the world is obviously my whole being.
Yeah. You should come and have a look at our netnographies. We're doing some really cool stuff and really fun stuff. We equally analyzed the motto, tagline, or mission statement of all of those camps as well. And so then there can be conversations about how that story is told. Do those stories line up with the pictures?
Right.
So, but we're getting a little off track. So let's go back to quant and qual. Let's go back to that for a second.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about it before, but I think it's worth saying, as a general rule, people assume that quantitative or numbers are much more accurate and valid or worth paying attention to more than stories.
Yes.
That is an old debate, which unfortunately still lingers because the debates and the progress that we make often within the university or the academy don't necessarily translate or ripple out quite to the extent we think they ought or they should have. Yeah. So just a reminder that even to this day, when I'm working with, say, government or businesses, they've gotten themselves into habits of believing numbers and numbers first. Yeah. Versus stories. And so there's a couple things I want to say about this. They are two different sides of the same coin. Okay. It's about collecting information, analyzing it, and then being able to say with confidence what we learned about a thing. And that confidence extends to decision-making for that person, the person who's collecting the information.
Scheduling affects every camper and every staff member's summer. It's easy to make mistakes, and it takes a ton of time. Bottom line, scheduling is hard, but it doesn't have to be. Let Camptivities help you create a balanced and engaging schedule without the mistakes and without those long days and late nights. Here's what Camptivities has to offer: auto scheduling, camper scheduling, group scheduling, elective scheduling, manual adjustments, over 50 different reports, tons of customizable settings, and so much more. If you're looking for a better way to schedule this summer, they would love to show you the next big thing in camp. Visit camptivities.com to set up a time to chat. Let Camptivities help you get away from your desk and back out to camp.
So help me with this. I mean, I get why quantitative is easier to understand and easier to get. I mean, it's easier for everybody to picture.
It's faster.
I hope. And as you say, that's just cultural.
That's true.
Qualitative stuff. How do researchers learn from the stories? How do we pick out the lessons, acknowledging? Now, I think we don't acknowledge, back to my limited research, but I went to a research university and was involved in some pretty serious research when I was there. We have to acknowledge that even quantitative research has biases. I think the biases in qualitative research, we tend to, I think that acknowledging the bias sometimes makes us devalue qualitative research. You know what I'm saying?
Yes
we
and no.
We don't
Yeah, I think
acknowledge enough bias in quantitative, and
Correct.
we over acknowledge it in qualitative. So how do we learn from qualitative in particular?
I'm gonna agree and disagree in the two halves.
Yeah.
This is what makes our conversation so much fun. So quantitative definitely has bias. Let me tell you a little story. I love a good story to explain these differences. I am going to say this though. I disagree that by telling people about the bias of qualitative makes it sound less credible. In fact, not telling people what the bias is almost dishonest, because you're not telling people the context and the perspective and the kind of what you were looking for. Because we kind of know you will find what you're looking for. You kind of, if you set up the parameters, regardless of how hard you work at removing your own sort of biases, this idea of implicit bias, also sort of when we use the word implicit bias, and we use that mostly about how we discriminate. It's often unconscious. It's not intentional.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing about bias in research is that there's a good chance there's bias that has shaped the research project, whether it's quantitative data or qualitative data. It's just how good are you at actually understanding what those are and then articulating them so that the reader, the audience has the opportunity to use their own judgment, understanding your perspective and how it may have shaped the study. So perhaps we're talking qualitative. I am a qualitative researcher. We are talking ourselves down, but then arguably what we're also doing is providing an honesty and some deep reflection about what has come into play for us shaping that particular study. But back to your first point about there's bias in all things, including quantitative research. Last week, we talked about ontology and epistemology, which is your understanding of reality and truth. And that there are these like philosophical traditions that have developed based on particular positionings on those two axes. That's what we got into a little bit last time. The quantitative research is largely held within positivist philosophies that assume that the researcher is objective. And it's an assumption that is so universal that they don't even speak to it. This is the assumption that is supposed to be just, even if you read a medical article, unless they tell you that they're not objective, they're assuming they're being objective. Now, this is a fun debate that's happened in our household a few times. My dad comes from what we call the hard sciences, and I come from the social sciences. So he has more of that medical science background. And I remember him telling me that quantitative research is biased or shaped by the researcher. If you can imagine two different researchers working in the same lab on the same project, and one day, one researcher comes in and takes the slide, which might have like a tissue cell, a slice on it, and puts it into the microscope. Now, the researcher is supposed to record which way they put the slide in. And they put it in, to talk about, let's say they put it in. Say the next researcher comes in 2 hours later and is expected to, we do this, we look at each other's data to see if we come up with the same outcome, but they put the slide in upside down. It's quite possible that they are going to record an opposite result, possibly a contradictory result.
Right.
Just by the way that they put the slide in under the microscope.
Yeah.
So it's not the intention to create bias or to shape the outcome, but just your position physically. This is, I know, metaphoric, but physically, the position in which you place the data is going to shape the way that you see it differently.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to remember that about all research. It doesn't make the research wrong or the outcomes wrong, but it does mean that occasionally the story that's told or the recommendations that are offered have a lean.
Right.
And if we're good about it, we tell people what that lean looks like. I got the data this way. I put it under the microscope this way. And so therefore I saw these structures in the slide. My colleague but if they recorded, I put in the slide this way and I looked at it from a different angle.
Yeah.
And I saw this. It doesn't mean it's wrong. Those structures are still going to be part of those cells or whatever that slice is showing. Yeah. It's just a different way of seeing it. And this is, as a random connection, this is often what we're talking about when we talk about decolonizing our ways of thinking, is that people come to knowledge in different ways.
Yeah.
We may be looking at the same stuff, but we understand a different thing. It doesn't make it wrong or inaccurate. It just means a different perspective offered us a different way of seeing it.
Right.
Yeah. So back to the quant and qual conversation.
Yes.
The other big thing to know, another arguably reason why qual gets a bit less of a name is because it feels mysterious. It feels like most people are like, I can do math. I can put the numbers together and pull them apart in particular ways. And so I can feel confident. I understand that numbers don't lie. That's not true, actually.
Sure.
If you put the numbers together in different ways, you will get different answers.
Yep.
Even that difference between putting a set of like a formula inside a bracket and then forgetting the bracket one time, totally different outcome. So statistically, you actually can tell very, very different stories based on how you slice and dice the numbers, like what snapshot you pull. And anybody who works with numbers to provide evidence of things will know that. They'll know that they can pull out certain parts of the story, but put back into the wider context, it tells a different story. So numbers can be manipulated in terms of the analysis and therefore storytelling or the outcomes, results as well. Qualitative, on the other hand, people, it's a lot of work. So most people don't sit down with hundreds of thousands of words and read them and read them and read them. And that's kind of the starting point of analysis and qual. And so that's the first turnoff that people are like, nah, too hard basket. And then after that, I think it then feels like a mystery. It feels kind of like, how do they sort through it? Most qualitative researchers at the foundation rely on something called thematic analysis. And that's where we go through 3 different sort of levels and understanding of how we organize and categorize, not necessarily the stories, but the meanings that we're pulling from the stories. And the good news for us is if you read enough stuff, you reach a point called saturation where you don't hear new stories anymore, new ideas anymore. So that's usually around 20 interviews, which are about 60 minutes a piece. That's when you kind of go, I'm going to hear more and different retellings, but no more meaning, no more new meanings.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And that's when it's a bit like being handed 100,000 M&Ms and sorting all the greens and all the blues and all the oranges. And once you've got them sorted into their piles, then, you recognize they have similar meaning. You know that because of the questions you set up, because you're looking to find answers for particular things. You're looking for the answers to particular things, the meanings of particular things. And then the more that you kind of spend with it, the more you go, all these stories point to the same kind of experience, the same kind of meaning. So it sounds a little bit loose on the edges, but as we go, it gets sharper and sharper and sharper. And then we can turn around and hopefully write something fairly short and punchy, although that's in the academic world. So that's still tens of thousands of words or, thousands of words, to share that story back to folks about once we looked at all of this and we could bring it back to a sharp point, these are the things we found out. Arguably because of the way that qualitative data works, it's very rich, it's very deep, it's very narrow, it's very niche.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can't look at everything at once. There's just, in order to reach that saturation point, to reach a level of confidence, to speak to it, you need to have a lot of data that's sort of saying the same thing, that gives you that confidence that, this definitely is going on here. And so by consequence, you have to set the parameters really, really narrow because you have to just focus in on something sharp. Quant does the opposite. It's very broad, but very shallow. It can't get deep. Numbers can't go very far. So as an example, numbers are often done by survey, and it's kind of a tick the box on a scale of 1 to 5. How much do you agree with this statement? That's called a Likert scale. It's a solid, tried and true, tested method. It's been seen a zillion times, which is a good thing for us as scientists. We go, that tool works. That tool works. Good. Let's use that tool. Don't reinvent the wheel. This is a good tool. It works. Numbers will tell you how much somebody agrees to a statement or not in that moment, in that time and place.
Right.
Qualitative will get somebody to tell their story of that sentiment. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how happy do you feel at camp right now? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a quantitative question. A qualitative question is, describe to me how that happiness feels and why it's happened. So we can go deeper. We can start digging into the phenomenon. And the nice thing about the story part, I find, I'm qualitative, I'm biased, is that I can keep asking questions. So as somebody tells me their story, I can keep prompting and probing, and my curiosity can let us go deeper.
Yeah.
And my curiosity is hopefully very well informed because I've read a lot of literature. I've done a lot of theory. So I'm coming in with all these layers of knowledge. And when they go, well, actually, my favorite bit is when we threw rotten tomatoes at each other. That made me the happiest.
Yeah.
Then I can go, well, tell me more.
Right.
I can be looking for things like, does a little bit of naughtiness or mischief make kids feel great? Because it kind of does.
Sure
Breaking
does.
these rules. Yeah, like a food fight. My goodness. I listened to 3 children on a car ride this weekend talk about like how you get to do food fights when you get to high school.
Oh.
And I couldn't burst that bubble because I was like, this is delightful. I was like, yep, you guys have a couple years before you get there to find out how actually but for this moment, if that's what you want to believe, all right. Yeah. That was really quite sweet. So, I mean, that's what qual lets us do is we can keep kind of digging at the meaning behind the meanings and the ideas and go. But as you can see, you're going down rabbit holes. So you kind of have to stay on track. You have to stay on track. Otherwise, you get too much random that you can't make sense out of later.
Give yourself a huge helping hand this summer with Michael Branwine's 5 Fingers of Fantastic Staff Training. Without the need to travel and from the comfort of your home or office, you can gain control of your staff training prep through his interactive and engaging online seminar. Michael's annual Brandwine on Training, the step-by-step system for planning and presenting your best staff training ever, isn't a boring webinar. Michael uses the same techniques and tools from his in-person trainings, but in a virtual space, bringing folks together from around the world. Join Michael in ACA, Illinois this March 26th and 27th. Learn more about this and other Michael Brandwine seminars with ACA, Illinois at acail.org/Michael Brandwine. And don't delay, early bird rates end February 1st.
So when we think about research, how do we pick who we talk to? Who do we know? Who do we know whose opinion matters?
These are good questions and they're important ones. When we're setting up a study, we draw kind of a boundary line over and around who is going to be the best to answer those questions. This is something called sampling or sampling technique. And it's what we do to create our research population. These are the 12-letter words that go with research. Yeah. What we're looking for are people who are going to speak well to the phenomenon we're trying to find out about. And we set up those expectations right from the get-go. Those expectations are set up in the research questions, even like right from the outset, we need to know who it is we want to talk to find out more about a thing. So as an example, if I want to understand better what it's like to be a camp counselor and to use your feelings as part of your work, I want to talk to camp counselors. Mm-hmm. But I recognized when I did that study that camp counselors may not always have that big picture view of how that works. So then I spoke to their managers and the camp directors as well, because they have a different perspective of how that works. If we want to understand how children experience the outdoors, we need to talk to children, not their parents. And research will show you that parents have a totally different interpretation of their children's outdoor recreation than children. It's one of my favorite chapters by a friend, Erin Sharp, and her colleagues. And my favorite quote is, I could feel the wind in my hairs. I mean, who has hairs plural? Like, no, I don't remember when my hair was plural and I felt individual follicles, but kids do. You know, kids live a bit more in the present, are a lot more mindful. And that study specifically showed how they peeled back the adult layers of meaning. Right. They had really worked at it. They worked really hard to pull back the researcher adults' meanings, the parents' adults' meanings, and really to understand children. And for that, to that end, in qualitative research, often we work with children in play and through art, as well as interviews and that kind of thing, because they just talk, and they talk so wonderfully and honestly, and so sometimes differently than adults. So so we work out that population. Yeah.
Just your hair story reminds me of something. One of my favorite profs who his research was done in the late 60s, he was talking about that difference in perception of adults and kids, and how as adults, partly just because of the amount of inputs, we have to learn how to funnel down our perception because there's so much input. But when you're kids, you're still aware of all the input. So he, as I say, was doing his research in the 60s. So they were doing a lot of LSD studies. And they said that one of the things that happens in LSD studies is you become back aware to the things that you have forgotten over time, like feeling individual hairs. One of the things that always stuck with me is some of the things that they had done was around perception of light. And one of the things that you can apparently do as a kid that you just lose is that when light bounces off around a corner, when you're a kid, you can perceive the refraction of it. So you can see the rainbow. If it's just light hitting a certain thing at a right angle around a corner, you can see the rainbow as that light's refracted around a corner.
That's
but
so cool.
You lose that. And then they do LSD studies and people are like, oh yeah, I remember I used to be able to see this. And so thank you. Thanks for an opportunity to tell that, but remind me of that story. But it's just an interesting thing, brilliant, especially in this business, to think about the value of the perceptions of children.
Yeah.
That to me is really exciting.
Kids experience camp differently.
Yes.
And it is, to be fair, one of my critiques at time of camp research is that we don't ask kids that often.
Yeah.
We ask counselors and parents and staff, but we don't necessarily ask kids. Now, there's good reason. The ethics of working with kids in research is difficult and lengthy and challenging to obtain. And I think when we're under so much pressure in the academy, the culture is called publish or perish. It's terrible. Right. So turnaround and pressures like that have kind of made it very hard to get into deep study with, for example, kids. But kids and how they see and understand camp, maybe that needs to go on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, because who knows? But I expect their stories would be very cool.
Yeah.
So, I mean, part of the reason why we set boundaries around the population that we work with, one of the important ones is this idea of generalizability. It's the idea that if you study a particular population, can you then speak to the bigger population? And most quantitative studies are very concerned with this, and they will look for something called a representative sample. So a group of people that represent the diversity on a whole bunch of different criteria of the broader audience that they want to speak to. Qualitative research, because we are in niche work, we don't worry nearly as much about that. Because we can't. It's kind of an impossible task. So a lot of qualitative work will be very niche, tight, small population groups that may or may not represent that diversity. If diversity is an important part of the study, they may only look for that particular diverse group to speak to it. And then unlike quantitative research, which is often, generalized and then can be said, well, if it's true for these people, it's true for all of these people. Qualitative say these are the lessons that we can learn from this and look to apply with other populations thoughtfully or intelligently. So, I mean, that's one of the big and important things. And part of why we wanted to have this conversation today was to remind folks that different styles of research are done for different reasons, but they don't necessarily offer you a single golden Willy Wonka ticket answer that can be applied everywhere or universally. And these are some of those, again, problems that show up is when research is interpreted into, marketing output or narrative, when it's shared back into the world. Often the findings and the dynamics and the subtleties and the nuances of those findings are flattened and they're taken out of context. So it doesn't mean that the information you're getting is untrue, but you no longer know what the context of its truth is, if that makes any sense. So when you see little snippets or that says camp is this, my reaction is always, okay, within what context? What are the parameters? How does that connect? How can I look at it from the perspective in which that was true so that I can draw away the learning from it to put it into a different context or into my particular operating context. And that's when we talked about the idea of using proof, pudding and proof.
Yeah.
it was to do it with tongue in cheek, but to remind our listeners that there is no singular golden answer. There is good information that you can use with confidence, but knowing its context will help you interpret it into your own.
Right. Right. Okay. I want to wrap up with one question now that we have I don't know how I'm thinking of it, but we've torn apart what research is and what it can be, and what we have to think about. Where do campers go to get good research now that we know? I think the purpose of this very discussion is to say research, as you say, not the golden ticket. It doesn't answer everything, but still, we need research to do our job well, I believe, or you and I would not be having this conversation. Where do we go to find the right stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I think research gives you confidence in backing you up on the things you're doing well and in giving evidence to it. It gives you confidence in decision making and running your camps and calling the shots. It gives you innovative, new, novel ways of approaching. So practice and language about camp and what, really the world we're evolving into and the context in which camp is actually trying to exist. So research can provide so much. And I really love when research changes head thinks, even just by a couple of degrees, because it brings on such new, wonderful things. So yeah, how do you find research? Well, whenever I'm talking to folks, the first thing I ask is, do you know about Google Scholar? It's a search engine that is run by Google and uses the same intuition as Google, but it's a database that is extremely wide throw of the net on academic publications. So you don't have to learn some special database language and plus symbols and so forth. You just, just search the way that your brain is used to, if you're used to that kind of Google search intuition. It will show you a ton of answers, and you can use the advanced search tool. The problem with Google Scholar is if you don't have access to academic databases, you'll see that a lot of them are locked. So what you can do is you can access abstracts. You can read the little blurb about the study and decide whether or not it's worth pursuing getting the article. If it is something you want to do is get the article, then you can sometimes write directly to the researcher. I've definitely had people write to me, and I send them the published copy. Yep. And there's also a few other things like ResearchGate and academia.com. These are different platforms that researchers will upload what we call preprint. So it gets us around some of our copyright, and you can get access. Yeah. The other thing is to look for journals that speak to your field, in this case camp, that are open access, which means that they don't charge any fees for you to reach their publications, where a lot of academic journals are behind paywalls that university libraries pay for. So academics, if you know somebody who works in a uni or as a student, then maybe they can pull it for you. Yeah. But finding journals that don't have paywalls, it's becoming more and more common. Some researchers will pay for their access to be free. So my university might pay a fee so that my journal article is always free and open for anyone. In particular, the Journal of Youth Development is open access, and it publishes great stuff on camp all the time. I was reviewing an article just last week, and I'm so excited for the world of camp to get their hands on it, because it's all about doing DEI and doing it well and who's doing what. And it has so many good ideas and such good explanation, and it's good structure about how to go about doing it at camp specifically. So watch out for that, because that one should hit the ground. We can talk more about it when it hits publication in another couple of months. Other sources of finding good research, often governments will produce what we call white or gray literature. They're short reports that summarize stuff that's going on in a particular industry. Knowing how big camp is financially in North America, you would expect that provincial, state, and sometimes federal reports will be made. You can also look at peak organizations like the American Camps Association. They produce a couple of reports that are quite significant, at least once a year. So the most recent one that came out, there was one a few months ago that's called the Summer Camp Impact Study. But the most recent one in the last couple of weeks was about like the economics of the camp market. So what families have what money and are able to pay in going to camp. Other things are researchers will write for things like the Camp Magazine. That's an ACA-run publication.
Camping magazine.
Sorry, camping. Yep, that's the one.
Yep.
And, you'll also get little snips here and there of different things. The way that I encourage people to assess the quality is to look at who's the author and look up a bit of their background. Something like Google Scholar actually has scholar profiles that are linked, so you can look at that and see how much they're producing and what kind of topics they're dealing with. Hopefully, if they've got a few letters after their name, then they've been research trained and they've embraced some of the ethics that go with doing research, because we are quite bound by research ethics, as we should do.
Yep.
And the other thing is to always kind of go, and who was this produced for, and who was this produced by, or who was this funded by? Just to get a sense of the perspective, like the narrative that is being shared. So it's just a reminder to just be thoughtful when you engage with information and understanding its purpose, and not assuming that it was uniquely written for you in your camp right then, that you might have to modify and interpret as well to take it to be used right away.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Mandy, thank you for spending time on this and giving us some foundations for the rest of the season. Apparently, I'm grateful.
Yeah, pleasure.
If people have follow-up questions and want to dig into qualitative and quantitative with you and spend some good time in discussion, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach me at getlamped@gmail.com. That's just like a light, GETLAMPED@gmail.com.
Perfect. And if you have suggestions or specific topics that you would like us to cover in this season or the next, I assume there's going to be another season of this, then please get in touch with me, Travis@gocamp.pro. Again, thank you for the feedback on our first episode. We look forward to any feedback that you have, anything that we can do to make this as useful as possible to you.
And if you didn't know, now you know, Camp Pro.
Go Camp Pro, way beyond the basics.